Welcome back, Midnight Wanderers. Tonight, we step through velvet curtains into a world of glamour, grime, and scents best left unnamed. This isn't the fairy tale of a radiant queen in a golden gown. It's something far more real and far less fragrant. We're diving into the court of Elizabeth Tudor, the Virgin Queen of England. A woman immortalized in paintings, poems, and plays. Her powdered face, her towering ruff, her legendary sharp tongue, all symbols of majesty. But lean in closer, and you'll find something else beneath the silk and jewels. The sour scent of survival. This is not a tale for the sensitive-nosed, so light a candle, lower the lights, and take a deep breath. Or maybe don't. The year is somewhere in the second half of the 1500s. England is clawing its way out of medieval superstition into the strange enlightenment of the Renaissance. Across the Channel, Spain watches with cold ambition. But within the walls of Whitehall Palace, England's beating heart sits on the throne. Regal, radiant, and fiercely alone. She is the face of an empire. But tonight, we're not looking at her through the golden glow of oil portraits. We're slipping behind the curtain, into the shadows, into the rot. Because what hits you first isn't the jewels, it's the air. Thick, dense. A royal brew of sweat, animal fat candles, herbal sachets, rotting food, and the heavy perfume of too many bodies in too little space. Her palace may sparkle, but its scent clings like mold. Whitehall glimmers by candlelight. Gold leaf ceilings reflect the flicker of flames. Tapestries hang heavy not for decoration, but insulation. England is cold and drafty. The floor is lined with rushes, straw mixed with dried flowers like mint and lavender. But these are not changed daily, not even weekly, sometimes not for months. Those fragrant rushes absorb everything: spills, urine, the droppings of rodents that scurry freely through royal corridors. This is not a clean space. This is a beautifully dressed petri dish. Through the perfumed fog drifts Elizabeth, a spectacle in lace and embroidery. Her white face glows in the dim light, thick with lead-based paint. Her gown cascades around her in layers. Regal, yes, but if you dared lean close, you'd find years of trapped odors soaked into every thread. She moves like a goddess. But gods don't sweat. Elizabeth does. She stinks. And so does everyone else. By Tudor standards, she was clean, perhaps even fastidious. But that's a very low bar. In her time, cleanliness meant not being visibly filthy. It meant avoiding water, not using it. Because water was believed to open the pores and let in disease. People feared hot baths the way we fear poison. And so, like most of her court, Elizabeth bathed rarely, once a month by some accounts. Whether I need it or not, she was rumored to say. Instead, she cloaked herself in scent. Her rooms were filled with pomanders, hollow balls filled with spices like ambergris, musk, and civet. These weren't luxury items. They were olfactory armor. She left behind a wake of heavy perfume, like a cloud of desperation trying to disguise decay. No one spoke of the smell, not because it wasn't noticed, but because everyone smelled just as ripe. Baths, when they happened, were ritualistic. A wooden tub, lined with linen to protect royal skin. Water boiled in copper pots and mixed with herbs. No soap, no scrubbing. Just sitting in reused water, hoping to emerge slightly less offensive. The Queen's attendants suffered the most. Her ladies-in-waiting, her physicians, the poor souls who dressed her, they were closest to the source. But context matters. This was an age where dung lined the streets and rivers doubled as sewers. Compared to that, a little body odor didn't raise eyebrows. Yet even in that grimy world, Elizabeth's devotion to illusion stood out. As she aged, she added more perfume, more powder, more fabric. She became a walking fortress of denial. Some say she had personal scent servants, staff whose only job was to manage her aromas. They perfumed her gloves, her fans, even her letters. Scent was her second crown, and she wore it with pride. But the illusion cracked. Whispers spread. Yellowed teeth, foul breath, heavy gowns caked in old sweat and makeup. Mirrors were removed from her chambers. Portraits were controlled with an iron grip. Vulnerability, even a trace of it, could shatter everything. Modern historians still argue whether her hygiene was particularly bad. Perhaps we've judged her through modern noses. She lived a long life for her era. She dodged plagues. Her teeth mostly stayed in her mouth. Maybe that's a triumph. Or maybe she simply concealed her decay better than most. Because for Elizabeth, her body wasn't private. It was political. It was the state. It had to appear flawless, even if it was rotting beneath the lace, the rats beneath her bed, the herbal water bowls in her chamber. They tell another story. A body protected not by purity, but by performance. She avoided bathing not out of laziness, but out of terror. Tudor medicine warned that hot water could kill, that it let in miasma, the invisible death carried by bad air. So she wiped instead of washed. She dabbed rosewater on her face and hoped that was enough. She believed too much cleaning could drain her essence, her strength, even her soul. A bath, when it came, was ceremonial. A tub dragged into her chamber, water laced with sage and rosemary, servants shielding her from cold drafts, a brief dip into warmth, then powder, perfume, and linen. The illusion restored. Soap, as we know it, didn't exist. What passed for soap was lye-based and harsh, more likely to strip skin than clean it. Instead, a basin and cloth were used, a gentle wipe here, a dab there, no scrubbing, no lather. Cleanliness meant control. It meant looking unbothered. It meant no one fainted when you walked by. The nobles copied her. They wore scented gloves, sewed dried flowers into their clothes, rubbed oils behind their ears. Water was for the reckless. Across Europe, the same fear held sway. Public bathhouses had closed after the plagues. Too sinful, too dangerous. Bathing became an act of suspicion, and filth became virtue. Elizabeth, ever careful, found her compromise. She changed her linens constantly. She believed that clean underclothes meant a clean body. A fresh shirt was as good as a wash. In her eyes, it was safer too. But even that system had cracks. When illness struck, she skipped even her rare baths, convinced that water would weaken her more. Her attendants noticed. They had to. In summer heat, the layers of powder, sweat, and perfume grew unbearable. The scent was a crown all its own, complex, commanding, and utterly inescapable. And still she dazzled, held court, directed empires. But her skin beneath the paint began to break. Her hair fell out. The lead in her makeup scarred her face. She switched to full wigs, but she refused to yield, to reveal weakness, to be seen bare. Because to be clean wasn't to be pure. It was to be controlled, seen the right way. And if that meant only bathing once a month, then so be it. The myth was more important than the woman. But under those majestic wigs was something else. Tiny kingdoms of their own. Lice, a queen's uninvited courtiers. Hair in the 16th century was a battlefield. Wigs weren't fashion, they were defense. Elizabeth's natural hair began to thin. Stress, illness, paint, it faded, and wigs took its place. Rows of styled wigs sat in her chamber, powdered and perfumed. But underneath, the scalp festered. The warmth, the sweat, the lack of washing. It invited guests. Lice laid claim to the crown. Servants with quiet hands combed through her hair, careful not to offend. No questions asked. Lice didn't care about rank. To fight them, she used vinegar. rosemary, pennyroyal, sometimes even mercury, anything to kill what clawed at her scalp. But the scent of desperation still lingered. Some say she scratched at council meetings. Others say she demanded stronger perfumes in the hotter months. A queen cloaked in image, but unable to escape the truth, crawling just beneath the surface. But wigs were no true defense. Behind the jeweled hairpieces and theatrical curls, whispers still slithered through the halls. Quiet, carefully passed from handmaid to handmaid, murmurs of combings that unearthed more than just dust, the crawling truth beneath the crown. Still, image ruled everything. In portrait after portrait, decade after decade, Elizabeth's flaming curls never faded. Artists were under strict orders: preserve the illusion. Even as her own hair thinned, dulled, or vanished entirely, the myth of Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, must remain untouched. She controlled her image with the same precision she wielded over Parliament. No painting of her could be made without her express approval. No blemish, no flaw, no strand out of place. Her symbolic hair would endure even as the real woman vanished beneath powder and wigs. And where the queen led, her court followed. Wigs became fashionable. Noblemen and women began layering curls, human hair, animal hair, anything to complete the look. But beauty brought baggage. Parasites made no distinction between peasant and aristocrat. Lice, mites, and fleas nested in these heavy crowns, hidden among pearl pins and peacock feathers. Hair became less about aesthetics and more about armor. If your head itched, you scratched in private and smiled in public. One tool grew surprisingly popular among the elite: the ear iron, a slender rod used to scratch beneath wigs without removing them. Picture it: a finely dressed noble at banquet, gracefully lifting a ruff to slide the rod between skin and silk. It was courtly grace hiding primal discomfort. Etiquette, Tudor style. Some of the so-called treatments bordered on grotesque. Thick pastes made of crushed herbs and animal fats were smeared across the scalp and left overnight, only to be combed out with hope and horror the next morning. Others wore vinegar-soaked linen caps to bed. Did Elizabeth try these? It's possible. She was meticulous, experimental, and determined to protect her crafted legend. But discomfort never touched her public face. Whatever crawled beneath her golden crown was hidden by layers of confidence, diplomacy, and carefully stitched silence. Historians still debate: was Elizabeth plagued by parasites more than her peers? Or did her unmatched visibility make her afflictions more noticeable? Some point to childhood illnesses, smallpox, typhus, that may have triggered early hair loss. Others blame the toxic lead and vinegar in her infamous cosmetics. Still others suggest something more psychological. After all, ruling a fractious kingdom of fanatics, spies, and power-hungry men is no balm for one's nerves or hairline. Regardless of the cause, the result was always the same: the real Elizabeth vanishing beneath layers of fabrication. Her wigs, like her rule, were elaborate constructions designed to hide chaos beneath symmetry. Her hair was no longer personal, it was political. It had to embody control, beauty, and myth, even as it concealed infestation. And still she stood tall, inspected troops, entertained foreign envoys, danced at midnight masquerades, her posture impeccable, her wigs towering like crowns carved from theater itself. But even queens get lice. The difference is, they hide it better. Still, Elizabeth knew how to use her hair, even what little she had left. She commissioned portraits that bathed her curls in heavenly light, symbols of eternal youth and unshakable grace. To her favorites, she gave strands of her hair as tokens, intimate, deeply personal relics. And considering how scarce those strands had become, they were treasures, keepsakes kept in lockets and ring bezels, passed down through generations. And perhaps They carried more than memory. Perhaps a few tiny stowaways came along for the ride. But it didn't matter. The myth grew. People saw the wig, not the woman. The icon, not the irritation. And what they didn't see, they were careful never to mention. And the lice. They didn't stop at the scalp. Body lice were everywhere, burrowing into the seams of royal undergarments, nesting in the folds of thick brocade gowns. Once again, Elizabeth relied on linen. She layered it beneath her clothing and changed it frequently, hoping to keep the invaders at bay. Her laundry staff worked like soldiers, boiling her garments in lye, scrubbing them until the cloth was nearly threadbare. But the lice always came back. Because this isn't just Elizabeth's story. It's the story of an age where nature seeped into every crack of civilization, where power meant nothing to a creature the size of a sesame seed. Still, Elizabeth didn't retreat. She added another pin, another pearl, another puff of lavender powder, and kept walking. The wigs distracted, the gowns shimmered, but beneath the glitter, another battlefield awaited. Had anyone been brave enough to look closer, past the powdered face, beyond the painted lips, they'd find a mouth ravaged by another invisible enemy: sugar. Elizabeth's teeth were a quiet tragedy. A glimpse inside her mouth would have revealed blackened enamel, inflamed gums, and empty spaces where teeth once stood proud. Her sweet tooth was well known, even celebrated, but the price was rot and pain. Sugar arrived in England in barrels from Portuguese and Caribbean traders. Once rare, it became a status symbol, a delicacy of power. And Elizabeth indulged in it endlessly. Candied fruits, marzipan castles, suckets, fruits soaked in thick sugar syrup. Entire banquets were sculpted from sugar. Flowers, animals, even miniature palaces. And she consumed them all. By middle age, her teeth began to betray her. They turned black. They loosened. They fell. Her breath, once perfumed with rosewater, began to sour. Her courtiers learned to flatter her without looking too closely. One foreign visitor remarked with a shudder that her teeth were black, a defect the English seemed to ignore. Was it politeness? Was it denial? Or was it just normal? In Tudor England, black teeth were oddly fashionable, a sign that one could afford sugar. Still, Elizabeth's condition was extreme. To manage it, she turned to what remedies existed: harsh pastes made from pumice, burnt herbs, and honey. They stung, and they did little. She rubbed them on with cloth or with toothpicks carved from silver or bone. Toothbrushes, as we know them, did not yet exist. She brushed carefully, rarely, and often too late. One story claims her physician had to strap her to a chair just to remove a rotting tooth. Her pain was that deep, her fear even deeper. In one version, a bishop volunteered to have his own tooth pulled first, to show it wasn't so bad. Whether true or not, the story captures her stubbornness, her pride. She endured. Quietly, she withdrew from public meals, avoided hard foods, ate behind closed doors, puddings, mashed vegetables, soaked bread. She rinsed her mouth with rosewater after every meal, mixed with vinegar and cloves. It helped mask the scent, but never healed the damage. In portraits, her lips stay closed, her expression tight, a silent contract between artist and monarch. Do not reveal the decay. One posthumous portrait shows her smiling. Historians believe the smile was added years after her death, nostalgia painting over pain. And it wasn't just cosmetic. Dental decay in the 16th century could kill. Abscesses, blood infections, untreated pain. Medical advice was primitive. Gums were lanced to release bad humors. Mercury was applied directly to wounds. Crushed coral was swallowed to strengthen the teeth. The remedies were often worse than the illness. No official dentist tended the royal mouth. Instead, barbers, physicians, or traveling tooth pullers offered their crude services with hooks and pliers that resembled torture devices. If Elizabeth needed one, she called them quietly, and endured the agony in silence. She began to eat alone. Her meals were private, her food soft, her public appearances shorter. But still, the poets praised her smile. Still, the suitors sent gifts. Still, the foreign ambassadors kissed her gloved hand. They saw what they were meant to see. And those closest to her? They learned not to look. Not to mention the way she winced when her spoon struck the wrong tooth. Not to ask when she last smiled without pain. Some say she powdered her teeth with crushed pearls. Others whisper of primitive dentures, false teeth wired into place. But they were painful, ineffective, and likely discarded. Instead, she adapted. She kept her lips tight, tilted her chin, spoke carefully, always controlled, because she understood. One slip, one whiff, one black tooth too many, and the myth would fracture. Elizabeth wasn't the only one. Her court suffered the same fate. Sugar spared no one. The rot spread even as it sweetened their tongues. But only she had to carry the burden of perfection. Every alliance, every portrait, every negotiation, balanced on the edge of her carefully curated illusion. One rotting tooth could unravel an empire. So she powdered her face, painted her lips, and built her silence. She was a queen. And queens do not flinch. Her skin glowed unnaturally in the torchlight, pale, too pale. The smoothness came not from health, but from layers of powder. And underneath it all, a storm was brewing. Next part continues with her bout of smallpox in 1562. Her illness nearly takes her. For days, no one knows if England will lose its queen. But Elizabeth survives. Her skin does not. Smallpox leaves behind deep-pitted scars on her once fair cheeks and along her temples. In an age where a monarch's authority is rooted in image, this disfigurement is not just personal, it's political. And so begins her lifelong devotion to a toxic ritual in white. She turns to a substance called ceruse, a deadly blend of white lead and vinegar. It is already known, even in her time, to be harmful, but it is also brilliant, blindingly white, ghostly smooth. It transforms her scarred flesh into porcelain. It conceals imperfections. It elevates her beyond human. But it also kills. Day after day, layer upon layer, she applies the poison. Ceruse seeps into her skin, inflames it, weakens it. The lead builds inside her, poisoning her blood, fogging her thoughts, making her skin thinner, frailer. Still, she endures. Because to let the illusion slip, even for a moment, would risk the unraveling of her divine persona. She is not just a woman anymore. She is Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, immortal, untouchable, and that illusion must be rebuilt each morning with painstaking care. Her routine stretches for hours, a base layer of ceruse patted on with a sponge until her face is blank, a canvas of the dead. Over that, pearl dust for shimmer, sometimes alabaster powder for brightness. Her cheeks are painted with vermilion, a brilliant red made from mercury sulfide, another poison, another price. Her lips, lined with cochineal, crushed beetles from across the sea. Her eyebrows are barely there, plucked to nothing, then redrawn with soot or sometimes glued on mouse fur. Yes, mouse fur. The result is stunning, otherworldly, a face glowing like moonlight under candlelight, smooth, luminous, inhuman. It is not a face meant for beauty. It is meant for awe, for obedience. And it works. Courtiers write poems in her honor. Foreign dignitaries bow in astonishment. Her people whisper stories of her radiance, though few have ever seen her up close. The portraits, rigorously curated and widely distributed, reinforce the fantasy. A divine queen suspended outside of time. But that fantasy cracks. Ceruse does not last. It dries, It flakes, it hardens. Throughout the day, her ladies must patch and reapply it. It seeps into the lines it was meant to erase, making them deeper. It ages her as it tries to preserve her, or removing it is worse. Vinegar, alum, crushed eggshells, these are used to strip it off. The process stings, peels, draws blood. It tears away the flesh it sought to perfect, and yet she repeats it. Every day, every year, because she has to. Her skin grows thin, green, fragile. Open sores begin to bloom beneath the paint. They don't heal. Some say they never could. Her immune system, already burdened by age, collapses under the weight of chemicals. There is cruel irony in it all. The very mask that preserved her youth is what destroys her face. Lead corrodes. Mercury corrupts. Still, she refuses to stop. Because this mask is not vanity, it is policy. To appear young is to appear in control. To appear flawless is to silence gossip. To appear eternal is to keep the wolves at bay. Her painted face becomes a shield as powerful as any army. Her ladies-in-waiting treat the process like a sacred duty. They blend, apply, strip, and reapply with trained precision. They do not flinch. They do not speak. They are artists in a war of appearances. Over time, her look becomes not just iconic, but mythic. The towering lace ruffs, the glittering rubies, the golden gowns. Each detail serves the same purpose, to distract from what lies beneath. She becomes a living painting, a portrait animated by willpower. But behind closed doors, whispers spread. Some courtiers mutter about the queen's health. One diplomat writes that her face must be rebuilt every morning. Others note the flicker of exhaustion in her eyes, the tremor in her hands, the stiffness in her movements. But none dare say it aloud. Historians today still argue. Was Elizabeth poisoned by her own reflection? Did the lead shorten her life? Did it erode her judgment? Some claim her late life symptoms, fatigue, memory lapses, mood swings, match those of lead poisoning. Others argue her longevity proves she managed the danger. But all agree, no ruler in history clung to her painted mask so fiercely. There's even a ghost story among fringe historians that in her final days, she refused to remove her makeup, that the mask hardened, that it became a shell, that the queen died not just painted, but encased. Her flesh suffocated beneath layers of white lead, her true skin long vanished. It is likely untrue, but it is fitting. In many ways, she was buried long before death, beneath centuries of paint, pearls, and pressure. The pale face had meaning. In many cultures, white skin signaled status. It meant you did not labor. You did not sweat. You did not belong to the common world. In Japan, geishas used rice powder. In England, queens used lead. And Elizabeth? She used it as a wall, between herself and time, between herself and weakness, between herself and everyone else. Her enemies accused her of vanity, of sorcery, of unnatural pride, but none could deny her presence. Even in hatred, they revered her. And when she finally passed, the truth horrified those who prepared her body. The vibrant queen of portraits was gone. What remained was frail, gray, scarred, a woman ravaged by her own disguise. And yet, her effigy bore none of that truth. Her funeral mask was flawless, her lips red, her skin white, her legend unbroken, because in death, as in life, Elizabeth remained the woman she painted herself to be. We remember the white mask, the red mouth, the far-off stare, the figure who ruled like a ghost in pearls. She may have bled beneath the surface, but the world never saw it. She turned her body into a symbol, her skin into a message, her makeup into monarchy, and that message endures. The gowns shimmered, layered upon layered, like the petals of a mythical flower drenched in sweat, and perfume. Her silhouette was a painting come alive, majestic, imposing, eternal. But step closer, just a bit closer, and the truth hits you. That gown, it reeks, not of roses or jasmine, but of something deeper. It smells of time, of long days in thick heat, of enclosed spaces and tighter corsets, of cloth that hasn't known water in decades. Because here's the final secret of the Queen's mystique. Her clothing, no matter how exquisite, was never washed. Not really. Washing garments in the 16th century was a dangerous business, especially royal garments. Her dresses were handmade, stitched from brocade, velvet, silk, cloth of gold, materials that warp, stain, or fall apart in water. Washing them would mean destroying them. So they weren't washed. They were brushed, aired, sprinkled with herbs, turned inside out, and beaten with rods. Lavender was sewn into the folds. Gowns were hung near windows, but never in direct sunlight. Perfume masked what couldn't be removed, but the truth always lingered. Each gown soaked in sweat, tension, perfume, and the weight of ritual. And then, after each use, they were packed away into cedar chests, linen-lined closets, stored like relics, forgotten like secrets. Some of them could stand on their own. Quite literally, they were magnificent. They were untouched by water, and they were quietly rotting. But Elizabeth wore them anyway, because elegance was not about comfort, it was about power. And no one wielded power like the woman who turned sweat, poison, rot, and pain into a legend so radiant. We still believe it. Even now, symbols require care. And for Elizabeth Thermer, every thread she wore was a symbol, not of comfort, but control. Her wardrobe was never meant to be clean. It was meant to be maintained. Beneath her gowns, those majestic, bejeweled marvels, lived a hidden world of linen. Smocks, shifts, and undersheets were the unsung soldiers of royal hygiene. These layers absorbed the sweat, oils, and odors of the Queen's body. They were boiled, scrubbed, and replaced regularly. They were washable, and they were washed, sometimes once a day, sometimes more. Her maids worked tirelessly. Her collars were crisp, her sleeves spotless, her linens were white as frost. But the outer garments, the ones the world saw, were sacred, untouchable. To wash them would mean to ruin them. And so the layers stacked, 5, 6, sometimes more. A shift, a corset, a farthingale to sculpt the hips, a petticoat, an underskirt, an overgown. And finally, the outer robe, heavy as a chain, ornate as a tapestry, weighing 20 pounds or more. All stitched, pinned, and laced with the precision of a coronation. In summer, the weight suffocated. In winter, it preserved warmth. And everything else. Sweat from negotiations, perfume from royal processions, dust from court dances, wine, crumbs, even the occasional smear of ink or food, all buried in velvet folds. These gowns were not just garments. They were museums of scent. Historians have examined the few surviving pieces. They marvel at the stitching, the embroidery, the hidden emblems, phoenixes for rebirth, pelicans for divine love, fleur-de-lis for royalty. But what those garments no longer hold is the smell. That, too, was history. It just took longer to fade. Though Elizabeth had hundreds of dresses, she didn't wear each one only once. In her later years, she favored certain gowns again and again, some out of sentiment, some out of superstition. They became part of her, stained not just by scent, but by self. Her body chemistry, her diet, her stress, her illness, all soaked into the fibers like a whispered biography. A dress unwashed after a dozen uses, layered over perfumed linen, brushed but never bathed. It wouldn't just smell like royalty, it would smell like her. In time, Her wardrobe became less colorful. The blazing reds and golds of her youth faded to whites, silvers, and moonlit ivory. She became myth-made flesh. Her gowns transformed into declarations. Every detail, a message. Pearls for chastity, gold thread for power, embroidered symbols hidden in plain sight. A phoenix rising here, an ermine tail there, but beneath it all, still unwashed. She was never oblivious. Elizabeth surrounded herself with buffers, sachets of dried herbs, bowls of flower petals, scented gloves. Her bedding was changed constantly. Her underlayers remained impeccable, but the outer shell, the royal illusion, was preserved, not cleaned. One foreign ambassador once remarked cautiously that Her Majesty's gowns were pleasing to the eye, if not always to the nose. A courtly insult, a veiled truth. But in Elizabeth's world, even the air was curated. To critique the Queen's scent was to court disgrace. Her accessories were treated the same. Gloves soaked in oils, slippers perfumed, starched ruffs, those radiant white collars, ironed daily but never washed. They yellowed with time, sometimes dyed to mask the change. They were stiff, high-maintenance symbols of perfection, and they sat around her throat like halos or cages. There was a constant war between elegance and entropy, between display and decay, and Elizabeth always chose display. She was the Virgin Queen, the warrior monarch, the untouched sovereign who never left her palace, never married, never wavered. Her unwashed gowns mirrored her contradictions. They dazzled and decayed. They were divine and damp. After her death, most of these garments disappeared, repurposed, buried, lost. But the myth survived. Modern designers still study her silhouettes. Costume historians still marvel at the craftsmanship. But what they cannot recreate is the atmosphere, the scent of a woman who would rather wear rot and roses than show even the faintest crack in her image. Because for Elizabeth, fabric was not fashion. It was armor. It did not need to be clean. It needed to protect. She drifted through Whitehall like a storm wrapped in lace. Her scent arrived before her, a mingling of orange blossom, rose, musk, and something darker, older, like the ghost of incense trailing behind a veil. That was no accident. Elizabeth didn't just wear perfume, she weaponized it. In a world where few were clean, scent became status. It marked the line between the court and the street, between divinity and decay. Her fragrance wasn't just about masking, it was about ruling. People didn't need to see her. They could smell her presence. Her perfumers were more than craftsmen. They were chemists, sorcerers. They blended ambergris, musk, sandalwood, jasmine, each drop imported, expensive, and painstakingly extracted. Ambergris, a rare substance aged inside the bellies of whales, was prized for its sweet, earthy scent and its power to preserve. Civet, taken from glands of exotic cats, gave depth and darkness. It was musky, animalistic, grounding the sweetness in something primal. Elizabeth adored these scents. Her collection spanned dozens of blends, one for morning court, another for evening audiences, a third for times of illness. Some came in crystal bottles. Others were hidden in pomanders, delicate metal orbs filled with scented wax that hung from her waist or wrists. She perfumed her gloves, her fans, her bedding, even her letters. She believed, as many did, that bad smells carried disease, so she surrounded herself with sweetness. Scent became her shield, but it came at a cost. Lead acetate, camphor, benzoin, mercury. These ingredients filled the court with fragrance and danger. One lady of the court reportedly lost her sense of smell from mercury-soaked perfume. Another fainted during a ball from wearing gloves too richly soaked in spirit-based oils. Still, no one stopped. To not wear perfume was to be unfit for court. Even her rivals admitted, no one smelled like Elizabeth. Some say her entire wardrobe was scented, sachets sewn into her gowns, releasing fragrance as she walked. Her aura became mythological, her wake a fragrance trail. In an unwashed world, scent was virtue. It was dignity. It was propaganda. And Elizabeth understood this better than anyone. She made herself unforgettable, not through softness or sweetness, but through presence, power, perception. She was the queen who layered musk over illness, rose oil over rot, and legend over flesh. And when she passed by, even if you never saw her face, you knew she was there, because the queen did not simply rule by decree. She ruled by scent. Behind the silks, beyond the scent of civet and rose, the truth lurks, pungent, unavoidable, and deeply human. Even queens must relieve themselves. Elizabeth I, for all her divine posturing, could not escape the most basic necessities of the body. Her hygiene rituals were well guarded, shielded behind veils of protocol and perfume, but the simpler functions, carried out in shadowed corners or behind embroidered screens, betray the raw reality of Tudor life. And that reality smells not of roses, but of ammonia, sour linen, and something heavier. Let us begin with the throne behind the throne, the close stool. A padded wooden chair with a hidden chamber pot beneath. It was her personal lavatory, crafted not just for function, but for dignity. Hers was lined with velvet or silks, sometimes perfumed, always cushioned. It followed her across palaces and progresses. If the queen needed to go, the stool was never far. The woman who tended to this intimate detail of her life held a title that drew chuckles from later centuries, the groom of the stool. But in Elizabeth's court, it was a position of enormous trust. The groom did not simply manage waste. She controlled access. She knew the queen's rhythms, physical, political, and emotional. She heard the private sighs, the whispered frustrations, even secrets spilled in moments of discomfort. Over time, the groom of the stool became more than a servant. She became a confidant, a shadow advisor, a gatekeeper with a chamber pot. But no matter how perfumed the stool, waste is waste, and waste must be emptied. Her chamber pot, whether crafted in silver or porcelain, was still a container of human filth. The task of disposing it fell to the lowest of the low. Waste was tossed into cesspits, emptied into vaults beneath the palace, or, in less formal settings, hurled from windows into the streets. The shout of "Gardez l'eau," French for "watch the water," became corrupted in English into "Gardez l'eau," a warning before waste rained from above. Elizabeth's palaces were more refined, but only marginally. Whitehall, Greenwich, and Richmond were laced with garderobes, vertical shafts tucked into towers or behind walls. One sat. One did their business. Gravity took care of the rest, sometimes into rivers, sometimes into stagnant moats, sometimes into dry stone vaults that hadn't been emptied in decades. Servants assigned to clean these shafts were often boys, old men, or the ill, poorly paid, lightly regarded, sometimes poisoned by the fumes, sometimes injured, sometimes buried alive by collapse or accident. Elizabeth preferred her own stool, perhaps for the privacy, perhaps for the smell, and yet not even her chamber could escape it. In the summer months, the entire palace became a pressure cooker of stench. Tapestries held in the fumes. The walls themselves exhaled decay. To battle it, her court deployed an arsenal. Dried herbs scattered near privies, coals scented with cinnamon. Incense burned day and night, fresh rushes thrown across the floor, especially near garderobe doors. But even all this could not defeat the stink. Visitors noticed. diplomats wrote home in poetic code, describing the palace as thick with the breath of many souls. Translation? It reeked. This was normal. Toilets did not exist. Plumbing was an idea, not a structure. Water, when available, was hauled in buckets. Elizabeth had bowls of scented water for rinsing her hands and face. But flushing? That was fantasy. Even hand washing was rare. The Queen did her best. She washed regularly, with rosewater, vinegar, and perfumed cloths. But her court did not follow suit. Hands passed from banquets to dances to ceremonial kisses without ever touching soap. Finger bowls were shared. Dishes were communal. Servants might carry a platter in one hand and a chamber pot in the other. A maid might adjust her ruff, then carve meat moments later. Elizabeth kept her inner circle cleaner than most. Her towels changed often, her gloves perfumed, her bedding fresh. But she still reigned over a world soaked in bodily byproducts. And it wasn't just people. Animals roamed the palace, lapdogs at banquets, cats in the kitchens, falcons in the corridors, horses stabled just beyond the walls. Animal waste mixed with human filth. The courtyards stank. The kitchens buzzed with flies. But the Queen adapted. She ruled through scent and ritual. When she retired for private relief, her stool was hidden behind curtains, her chamber freshly aired. Her fragrance, always present, filled the gaps where reality could not be hidden. Still, whispers grew. Some said she suffered from digestive issues, that her body produced a smell no perfume could mask, that her ladies were forced to change her linens constantly. Some claimed she used warm herbal infusions, marjoram, mint, lavender, to cleanse herself after each use. Others believed she endured it all in silence, one hand on her scepter, the other reaching discreetly for rosewater. As she aged, movement became harder. The stairs, the layers of clothing, the weight of her own image, it all bore down. Her attendants took over. Loyal, discreet, efficient. But the Queen herself became increasingly withdrawn. She refused to be seen eating, refused to be caught at rest. Even the most basic functions were masked in ritual, because to be seen in the act of being human was to risk the crown. And behind every gown, there was a queen. And behind every queen, a chamber. What lingered behind the tapestries was not royal, it was rank. Whitehall shimmered in gold leaf and Tudor roses, but beneath the velvet was rot. Step beyond the banqueting halls, past the perfumed courtiers, descend into the bowels of the palace. What you find is not poetry. It is not pageantry. It is sewage. Palace plumbing in the 16th century was not a system. It was an excuse. Garderobes emptied into vaults that overflowed. Cesspits festered beneath wooden floors. The summer heat turned every corner into a reeking tomb. The Thames, wide, muddy, and brown, carried every secret downstream. Human waste, kitchen grease, butchered remains. And yet, it was still the source of drinking water, still used for washing, still sacred and poisoned all at once. Efforts were made to hide the horror. Some garderobes were rerouted to rivers. Others had chutes or trapdoors, but cleaning was infrequent, dangerous, filthy. Workers choked, fell, died. Few volunteered for the job. Fewer returned to it. One tale from 1591 still echoes. A floor collapsed beneath a crowded privy at the Blackfriars Theatre. Dozens fell into the cesspit. Elizabeth was not present, but the symbolism is hard to ignore. Even greatness stands above rot. Within her chambers, she tried to escape. Windows were lined with sweet herbs, floors refreshed with rushes, bowls of vinegar placed near doors. Perfume dangled from her belt. But even she could not escape the truth in the walls. Some say she had shafts sealed in summer. Others claim she moved her bed from one room to another to dodge the stench. Her privacy became sacred not just for pride, but for survival. Yet she refused major repairs. Sewers were costly, unseen, unglamorous. They brought no glory. She would fund a pageant, not a pipe. And so the rot remained. But not all Tudor minds ignored the problem. Sir John Harington, her godson, designed something revolutionary: a flushing toilet. He called it the Ajax, a clever nod to Greek myth and English slang. He even installed one in his home and gifted the idea to the Queen. She laughed. She praised it. She installed one at Richmond and never used it. She trusted her stool, trusted routine, trusted silence. The Ajax faded into history. 2 centuries would pass before flushing toilets became normal. And Whitehall? It decayed. By the 1590s, the stink grew unbearable. Heat swelled. Vaults overflowed. Guests commented on the sour air rising from the gardens. The palace could no longer contain its own filth. And when the fire came in 1698, a blaze that devoured most of Whitehall, few wept. The grand halls turned to ash. The gold leaf melted. The waste burned with it. The stench was finally gone. Today, only fragments remain. Tourists stroll across stone paths where gowns once swept and guards once marched. But what they do not smell is the real history. They do not smell the linen, the waste, the rushes, the perfume, the sweat. The reality of a queen who ruled a palace rotting beneath her feet, and did it all with powdered grace. Because Elizabeth wasn't just sovereign over England, she was sovereign over illusion. Even if she ruled from a throne that smelled nothing like roses, reality lurks beneath the shimmer of Renaissance splendor. Even queens must answer nature's call. While Elizabeth Fergard's beauty secrets remain closely guarded, her bodily functions, those urgent, awkward necessities, reveal a side of Tudor life rarely discussed. This version of court life smells less like roses and more like ammonia, damp linen, and something fouler. Let's begin with the throne behind the throne, the close stool. Elizabeth, like all nobility of the era, relied on this padded wooden chair containing a chamber pot beneath a hinged seat. For the Queen, it wasn't just functional, it was regal. Lined with velvet, cushioned for comfort, sometimes even perfumed, it was carried everywhere by her personal attendants. The position tasked with this duty, groom of the stool, was far more powerful than the title suggests. These attendants had the Queen's full trust, managing not just waste, but privacy, timing, and confidential conversation. Some even became her trusted confidants and advisors. But even a perfumed chamber pot must be emptied. Servants, often elderly or very young, carried the waste to cesspits, vaults, or sometimes out the window. The shout of "Gardez-le" was the only warning to passers-by before waste rained from above. Royal residences had more refined systems, such as garderobes, vertical shafts where waste dropped down into pits or rivers. But these systems reeked constantly, requiring boys and old men to scrub the stone walls while choking on the stench. Elizabeth preferred her stool to these foul shafts. Her chambers in Whitehall were notorious for their summertime stench. Hot weather awakened every stagnant trace of waste buried in the walls and rush-covered floors. To mask the smell, servants scattered dried herbs, burned incense, and replaced rushes regularly. Still, visitors often remarked on the odor. One courtier poetically described the palace air as rich with the breath of so many gathered souls. That's code for it stank. Hand-washing was inconsistent at best. Elizabeth wiped her hands with rosewater or vinegar-scented cloths, but many courtiers didn't bother. They passed from chamber pot to banquet without washing, from dancing to food preparation. Germ theory didn't exist. Illness was blamed on bad air or imbalanced humors. And so even the Queen's meals were shared with dirty hands and unwashed utensils. She tried to elevate standards in her own chambers. Fresh linens, perfumed gloves, and bowls of vinegar-infused water were common. But the environment remained steeped in filth. Horses and dogs roamed palace grounds. Waste accumulated in stables and gardens, and palace kitchens drew flies and rodents by the hour. Still, Elizabeth maintained appearances. When ambassadors arrived, her rooms were freshly aired and scented. Her stool was tucked behind curtains. Her perfume masked what the walls could not. Rumors circulated about her health, that she suffered from digestive issues, that her attendants frequently refreshed her linens. Some claimed she used herbal rinses after each use: lavender, marjoram, mint steeped in warm water. Others said she simply endured, clutching rosewater in one hand, her scepter in the other. As she aged, infirmity made movement difficult. Loyal attendants managed these personal routines with quiet precision. But Elizabeth avoided being seen eating, sleeping, or showing vulnerability. To appear human, mortal, was to threaten the myth of monarchy. Beneath the grandeur of Whitehall lay a festering truth. Tudor plumbing was a fantasy held together by faith and filth. The palace rested atop cesspits and clogged drains. Waste seeped through floors. Summer heat baked the excrement into the air. Visitors described the overwhelming stench in garden areas. Servants reported slime leaking from walls. Water for drinking was drawn from rivers that doubled as sewage canals. Efforts were made. Vents were added. Guardrobes redirected to pits or moats. But laborers cleaning these pits often died from fumes or infections. In one notorious 1591 incident, a privy collapsed at Blackfriars Theatre, plunging dozens into the sewage below. Elizabeth wasn't there, but the lesson was clear. Tudor infrastructure was rotting. Elizabeth's own chambers were scrubbed constantly. Herbs lined windows. Bowls of vinegar sat by the doors. Some say she refused to sleep in certain rooms due to the smell. Others believe she sealed garderobe shafts in summer months. Yet she never funded large drainage projects. Lavish on pageants and portraits, she remained tight-fisted with sewage. Her godson, Sir John Harington, invented a flushing toilet, the Ajax, in 1596. It even worked. She reportedly had one installed at Richmond Palace, but rarely used it. Why? Perhaps habit. Perhaps the gurgling noise unnerved her. Either way, she remained loyal to her velvet-lined stool. As the 1590s brought intense summer heat, the palace's limits were tested. Reports noted rising stench from the south wall and overwhelmed privies. Yet the Queen's schedule continued. Banquets, councils, ceremonies, all performed above a maze of rotting waste. Perfumes thickened, gloves grew heavier, and the Queen's court moved in seasonal progresses, not just for diplomacy, but for fresh air. Hosts bore the burden. Elizabeth gained respite. Still, she returned to Whitehall. Always. After her death, the palace decayed. By 1698, fire consumed it. The ash held no nostalgia. The smells, waste, and clogged tunnels were gone too. Tourists now stroll through fragments, unaware of the rot once hidden beneath. But for Elizabeth, this was daily life. A crown above, a cesspit below, and between them, lace, rosewater, and unflinching resolve. In her chambers, rosemary smolders. A physician unwraps his tools: leeches, herbs, iron instruments, even a roasted pigeon. Welcome to royal medicine, where science meets superstition. Elizabeth's physicians believed in the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. To cure imbalance meant bleeding, purging, sweating, or vomiting. Even for a scholar like Elizabeth, tradition overruled logic. Her beauty routine was inseparable from her health care. Honey and goose fat for rashes, cucumber soaked in vinegar for redness, but also mercury for skin, and warm pigeon flesh placed on her stomach to draw out illness. She endured bleeding sessions, leeches placed behind her ears or arms, feeding until dismissed. She loathed being seen as ill. Pain was hidden. Toothaches silenced. Fevers endured. One tale tells of a painful tooth packed with ground clove and opium, leaving her speechless for a week. Some treatments bordered on the magical: moon phase cupping, star-guided bloodletting, mustard onion plasters to cure colds, tonics brewed from powdered coral, dried toad, or deer horn. Her image demanded extravagance. No plain tea, only moon-charged lily root. But she questioned her doctors, rejected crude ideas, and tailored her regimens. She refused spectacles, hid arthritis, and turned meals into ceremony. Even in frailty, she stood tall. At one ceremony late in her reign, she appeared in pearls, her body frail, skin painted bright. She wavered, attendants ready to catch her. But she smiled, spoke strong, and the myth held. Even her hands were theater. They held scepters, signed laws, and waved to crowds. But beneath the gloves were calluses, discoloration, and decay. Scraped clean with bone tools or rat teeth, smoothed with pumice, soothed with balms of beeswax and rose oil. Her gloves, perfumed with spirits, caused irritation, eczema, dryness, and pain hidden beneath courtly gestures. She dabbed vinegar rinses on her skin, used fig pastes for infections, summoned leeches for swelling. A tale tells of a swollen finger, lanced in secret, hidden with a jeweled glove the next morning. None saw. All applauded. In the end, medicine at court was theater. She lived, perhaps not because of treatments, but in spite of them. Myth, willpower, and routine carried her. She ruled a kingdom from a place suspended between rot and reverence. The Virgin Queen, wrapped in lace, wreathed in roses, yet forever shadowed by what lay beneath the silk. A sovereign between the filth and the facade. A crown that gleamed, while the ground beneath it festered. Personal discomforts play a role. Her body, for all its royal symbolism, is a source of inconvenience. Her teeth ache. Her skin itches beneath layers of soothes. Her breath cannot always be sweet. Her gowns weigh her down. Is it any wonder she prefers the thrill of letters over the mess of touch? In her later years, Elizabeth becomes more private. She dines alone more often. She speaks less. Her letters grow shorter, more formal. Some say her heart remains loyal to Dudley until his death. Others believe she grieves not for a man, but for the youth and freedom he represented. But her legend continues. Poets immortalize her as fair, eternal, untouchable. Painters erase her age. Ambassadors continue to address her as a goddess queen, even as they notice the powder thickening on her face. Behind the myth, though, is a woman who navigates affection like she navigates everything else. Carefully, strategically, with just enough vulnerability to be believable, and just enough distance to stay safe. Her breath may have turned heads for the wrong reasons. Her teeth may have scared off the faint-hearted, but her presence? Unmatched. Elizabeth didn't need a perfect mouth to speak command into the world. She didn't need a kiss to seduce an empire. She ruled hearts not with touch, but with terror, tenderness, and total control. And maybe, just maybe, that's more romantic than any rose. The sun hangs low over Richmond Palace, casting long golden shadows on the tapestries. Inside, behind closed and curtained windows, Elizabeth the Richesse sits in silence. She is nearly 70. England's lioness is withering. The court, once brimming with music, now whispers. Her once fierce voice has softened to a hoarse hush. Courtiers tread lightly, as if her body might fracture beneath their gaze. Because now the illusion is failing, and the stench of death, like all others before it, cannot be perfumed away. By this point in her life, Elizabeth is more waxwork than woman. She has built herself into a legend, the Virgin Queen, mother to her people, untouched by age or pain. But her body, like every body, betrays her. The signs have been there for years. The thickening of her makeup, the increased time spent in chambers, the ever-tightening circle of trusted attendants. There are no more progresses, no more late-night dances. She sits upright in a chair, unwilling to be seen lying down. Her skin, beneath the leaded layers of soot, is pocked and shallow. Her hair, long since gone, has been replaced entirely by wigs heavier than her crown. Her back aches. Her fingers, once ringed in gold, tremble, and yet she refuses her bed. For days, then weeks, she will not lie down. She fears, perhaps rightly, that if she does, she may never rise again. Even her attendants cannot deny the change. Her smell is different now. It clings not only to her clothing, but to the room itself. The mingling of age, decay, old powder, and illness creates a scent no perfume can mask. They change her linens daily. They bathe her in warmed rose water and vinegar, but the rot is from within now. The royal physicians fuss with tonics and opiates. She refuses most. She distrusts sleep. She does not want dreams. She does not want to appear weak. Weakness to her is not personal. It is political. Her council begs her to name a successor. She will not. To admit an heir is to admit an end. And so she gestures vaguely, retreats into stubborn silence. Only her most trusted remain, her ladies-in-waiting, who for decades have powdered her face, bathed her feet, cleaned her close stool. Now they watch helplessly. Some weep, others pray. They maintain her rituals, even as she ceases to recognize their purpose. The gowns are laid out, the perfume dabbed on gloves, but she does not dress. She does not move. She simply watches. One day she insists on sitting for hours in her coronation robes. Perhaps she senses the end and wishes to remember the beginning. Perhaps she fears the crown, once removed, will vanish forever. The robes are too heavy. She trembles beneath them, but endures. When she finally allows herself to be undressed, her body is startling, thin, pale, bruised. Her limbs move only with effort. The sores on her legs have worsened. Her breath is faint and dry, like wind through dead leaves. And yet, she holds on. She refuses her bed. Her final days are spent upright, staring into the distance, mouthing prayers or fragments of song. Fringe accounts speak of visions, ghosts of Dudley, of her father Henry VIII. Whether true or not, they reflect a deeper truth. The queen who ruled through symbols now lives entirely within them, and then one morning, she is still. She had not summoned her attendants for hours. Her body remains upright, but something has changed. She has finally allowed herself to rest. Her death is not immediately announced. Incense fills the room, not for her, but for those around her, to mask the scent of what's already begun. Her body, still powdered and perfumed, begins to loosen its grip on illusion. Courtiers file in. Physicians murmur prayers. Her ladies wipe her cold hands with rosewater. Her wig is removed. Her face, pale beneath the paint, is untouched for the first time in decades. She is, at last, bare. And still she commands awe. The funeral is grand. A procession of white horses. A coffin draped in cloth of gold. Her effigy, carved to resemble her younger self, is paraded through the streets. The people weep. The nobles bow. They remember the queen of power, not of powder. But her ladies remember something else. The vinegar baths, the close stool, the scented gloves, the whispered instructions to hide her blemishes, the nightly rituals, the smell of Suze and civet, the slow fade behind heavy curtains. They remember how much it took to make Elizabeth divine. And when the perfumes fade and the body is interred, what remains is the truth of all rulers, that they are human, that beneath the robes and jewels they sweat, they ache, they fear. Elizabeth's legacy is immaculate, her body less so. But in a way, that's the greatest trick of all. She fooled an entire world into seeing her as something more, and in doing so, she became something more. Her scent may have horrified, her hygiene may have been medieval, but her myth? Unstoppable. Floors and command silence from anyone who noticed the sharp tang of decay beneath the civet. Her court, on the other hand, was a living miasma. Imagine 400 courtiers packed into a single great hall. No plumbing, few windows, dozens of animals, dogs, horses, even pet monkeys, roaming the palace. Food spilled on floors, chamber pots beneath beds, unwashed velvet, the reek of animal fat candles and lace collars stained by sweat and time. The scent of hundreds of nobles, all wearing week-old gowns and perfumed gloves, created a fog that not even a dozen candelabras could cut through. Body odor in Elizabethan court wasn't an embarrassment. It was an epidemic. Each noble carried their own olfactory signature. Some favored florals, rose, violet. Others preferred musk, myrrh, patchouli. But when these fragrances collided in close quarters, the result wasn't a garden. It was a potpourri factory explosion. Add the scent of gout, infected wounds, rotting teeth, and lice-ridden wigs, and you begin to understand the atmosphere. One Italian visitor called the court fragrant, but not in the way of flowers. A Spanish ambassador joked, "The perfume of the English is like their politics, layered, overpowering, and impossible to navigate." The worst offenders weren't always the poorest. Some of the highest nobles stank the most. Their wealth afforded them layers, gown over gown, cloak over doublet, but not hygiene. Bathing was seen as risky. Better to powder the skin and wrap it in linen than risk a chill. If the queen noticed, she said nothing. To comment would be to admit the court, and by extension her reign, was built atop perfumed rot. Still, comparisons were whispered. Who reeked worst? Lord Burghley, her chief advisor, was famed for wearing the same patched robe for years, perfumed with herbs. His chambers reeked of parchment, pipe smoke, and old wool. Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, handsome, brash, bathed more often than most, perhaps twice a month. But he drowned himself in musk so thick it clung to the furniture. Servants called his quarters the lion's den, not for courage, for the smell. Even the ladies in waiting, wrapped in silk and lace, weren't immune. Beneath the finery were corsets never loosened, stockings never laundered, wigs that sheltered ecosystems. They slept in shared chambers, with chamber pots tucked beneath their beds. The air was dense, the sleep light, the scent unforgettable. Then there were the musicians, playing in overheated halls, sweating into their instruments, sometimes sleeping in their clothes. After a 3-day masque, they smelled less like melody and more like misery. So, who wins the title of worst? Was it the queen, with her mercury-laced paint and weeks-old gowns? Or her courtiers, smelling of venison, velvet, and ambition? Some argue Elizabeth may have been the freshest among them, not clean, but controlled. She masked her scent with ritual and civet, controlled proximity, and demanded perfume. But others claim that under the gloves, under the powder, the body betrayed her. Fringe theories suggest her ceremonial gowns were aired to dissipate scent, not just preserve fabric. That her odor, worsened by stress, menopause, and illness, was acknowledged, but never written down. Still, Elizabeth knew scent was power. She allegedly said, "A subject may lie, but a scent never does." Real quote or not, it fits. In a court built on illusion, scent was the final frontier, and Elizabeth ruled it. So, who truly stank the most? No clear victor, only victims. The queen stank, the court stank, the palace reeked. But together, they created a uniquely Tudor bouquet, a scent that lingered in halls, in memory, and now, perhaps, in your own imagination. And that may be the most Elizabethan thing of all. The tomb lies cool beneath Westminster Abbey's stone arches. Candles flicker. Here rests Elizabeth of Roukers, entombed beside her half-sister Mary, a pairing history didn't expect. Nor, perhaps, would Elizabeth have approved. Visitors see marble, velvet ropes, inscriptions. Few imagine the scent, the rosewater, the lead, the lavender sachets. Few imagine the queen as she truly was. Layered, perfumed, proud, and slightly pungent. But the legend endures, not in spite of these details, but because of them. Her hygiene, horrifying to modern noses, is not trivial. It's a lens, a way into her world. A world where power was image, where most smelled like yesterday's soup, where Elizabeth wore layers of powder, pearls, and civet to become something more. And she did. She fended off invasion, united a country, and turned her body, aging, aching, flawed, into a national symbol. We remember her portraits, pale face, ruffled collar, glint of gold. We forget that beneath the paint was skin untouched by soap, that beneath the wig was a scalp possibly crawling, that the mouth behind the speeches may have stank of ruin. Historians debate what's real, what's rumor, but maybe truth matters less than myth. The fact we still wonder how she smelled is proof of her power. Her scent was her final veil. Like everything else she wore, it wasn't comfort, it was control. Since her death, that veil has frayed. We've peeled it back, her cosmetics, her bath water, or lack thereof. And in doing so, we've come closer to her humanity. She wasn't a goddess. She was a woman who made herself one. Her courtiers copied her. Her court stank in unison, and they became part of the myth too. Her hygiene, or lack thereof, wasn't personal failure. It was cultural truth. Clean meant powdered, perfumed, presentable, no visible dirt, linen layers, effort invisible. And Elizabeth? She embraced the theater. She bathed in rose petals once a month, soaked gloves in animal musk. She made survival into sovereignty. So, as we end this fragrant journey, breathe. Yes, a real breath. Let go of the lead and civet. Let the centuries of ceremonial stink fade. Picture her, not as a monarch or painting, but as a woman in silk and secrets, navigating a world masked in perfume. Remember her, not just for triumphs, but for the uncomfortable humanity beneath it all. Let the rushes crunch underfoot. Let rosewater soothe your hands. Let her sharp voice fade into a sigh. And now, dear night owl, settle in. The past has spoken. The queen has departed, and all that remains is the hush of linen, the slow drip of wax, and the gentle drift into sleep. With detailed anatomical drawings and written observations, was sealed away. Hidden, locked inside the Vatican archives, church officials declared the material too disturbing and too politically dangerous. It remains there still, a relic of monarchy, a secret too strange for history books. A few scholars allowed rare access described the collection in whispered interviews. Fascinating and horrifying. The body as a battlefield, the mind shattered by flesh. Ferdinand VII died not as a king, but as a caution. His death marked the end of an era, but his legacy did not end with him. Instead, it passed into the arms of a child, Isabella II, the daughter who may or may not have been his. She inherited a kingdom already collapsing. Civil war, economic ruin, international scorn, and at its heart, a crown still heavy with secrets. The empire that once ruled continents now lay in ruins. Spain, the land of conquistadors, cathedrals, and golden fleets, had been reduced to a flickering candle on the European map. Its decline hastened not by war alone, but by the man who had worn its crown, Ferdinand VII, a king whose private obsessions swallowed his public duty, whose twisted anatomy bled into twisted politics, whose shame, unspoken, unhealed, became a national wound. His reign was not just a failure, it was a disaster sculpted from flesh and paranoia. He ruled not as a monarch of vision, but as a man ruled by fear, by mirrors, by whispers, by the shape of his own body. And through that fear, he destroyed so much more than himself. His 3 wives, each more ghost than queen by the end. His daughter, born of deception, crowned by doubt. His servants, silenced by terror. His people, starved, forgotten, exiled in their own land. All victims of a dynasty too proud to admit it had been broken from the start. But perhaps the greatest tragedy of all was this: Ferdinand was not merely the villain of his story, he was also its prisoner. A boy born into power he did not understand, trapped in a body he could not control, entrusted with a crown that magnified every flaw into an earthquake. He was not just a king, he was a warning. A reminder that power, when wielded by the damaged, becomes not just dangerous, but contagious. The rot spreads, from bedchamber to throne room, from anatomy to empire. And when the royal physician sealed Ferdinand's preserved organ in a box lined with velvet and wax, he wasn't just archiving a curiosity, he was burying a symbol, a grotesque monument to shame, to control without compassion, to authority without reflection, to the human body turned into a kingdom's curse. That relic remains hidden, deep in the Vatican archives, unseen, unspoken of. And yet, even in darkness it speaks, not of lust, but of legacy, not of scandal, but of sorrow. Ferdinand VII found peace at last in the silence of the grave, but Spain would bleed for generations to come, haunted by a king whose true crown was not made of gold, but of guilt, grief, and grotesque inheritance. A ruler deformed not just in body, but in soul. And history, merciless as it is, remembered him not for what he built, but for everything he broke.